There is a place in Europe where the continent slowly sinks into the sea, and life exploded in that collapse, with a ferocity that no African savanna can match in density. It is not a forest. It is not an ocean. It is a labyrinth of black canals, floating islands, and swamps that breathe like a giant lung between Romania and Ukraine. The Danube, the river that crossed empires, drowned armies, and fed entire civilizations, dies here. But before it dies, it creates. And what it created is too wild for any simple name. At the far southeastern edge of Europe, where the waters of the Danube finally surrender to the Black Sea, rises the largest untouched river delta on the continent, a web of more than 5,500 square kilometers of canals, lagoons, reed islands, and flooded forests that formed over more than 10,000 years of continuous sedimentation. The temperature swings between -18 degrees Celsius at the heart of winter and 38 degrees at the peak of summer, creating a brutal cycle of freezing and explosion that dictates the rhythm of everything living here. The delta grows roughly 40 meters toward the sea each year, a land still being born while its inhabitants already dominate it with absolute precision. This is the biome that modern Europe never knew it needed to fear. When the sun has not yet broken the horizon and the autumn fog sits heavy over the canals like a second water surface, something moves along the muddy banks with a confidence that belongs only to those who have never truly been hunted. The water buffalo, Bubalus bubalus, emerges slowly from the dense Phragmites australis vegetation, its curved horns glistening with the dew that rolled off the leaves during the night. Each animal can exceed 900 kilograms of compact muscle, and yet it moves through deep mud as if the ground were firm, its wide, flat hooves distributing weight with an engineering that no other European ungulate has mastered. They are not native to this delta in the strict sense of the word, but they have become an inseparable part of its ecology over centuries of presence. They graze the reeds that no other large species can digest efficiently, open natural clearings in the vegetation banks, and create mud pools that become microhabitats for dozens of species of invertebrates and reptiles. Steam rises from their dark muzzles in the pre-dawn chill, and for a moment, looking at those immense silhouettes against the still purple sky, it is impossible not to feel that one is watching something belonging to an era far earlier than our own. And something tells us it is not they who are out of place here. The surface of the larger canals begins to turn golden when the first oblique rays of sunlight touch the water. And it is precisely at that moment that the Russian sturgeon, Uso Gueldenstayati, completes one of the most ancient migrations any vertebrate still performs in Europe. This fish evolved more than 200 million years ago and survived extinctions that erased the dinosaurs, and yet today it is rarer than any mythical creature the folklore of this region ever imagined. It can measure more than 2 meters and 30 centimeters and weigh up to 115 kilograms. But what is striking is not the size. It is the permanence. A single individual can live nearly 50 years, carrying within its body the genetic memory of a world that existed before the emergence of the human species as a dominant force. Its long, sensitive snout sweeps the canal floor with electromagnetic receptors that detect the presence of invertebrates buried in the mud, with a precision any modern laboratory would envy. Predatory fishing and dam construction throughout the 20th century reduced the population of this species by more than 90%. But here, in this protected delta, some still ascend. There is still something in this water that calls them back, as if the river held a promise far older than any conservation law the human hand has ever written. There is no silence in the delta. There is only the illusion of silence for those who have not yet learned to listen. The golden jackal, Canis aureus, learned this before any other carnivore species in this region, and its expansion across the European continent in recent decades is one of the most unsettling stories in modern ecology. Here in the delta, where the canals create a natural network of protected routes, it moves between islands, swims crossings of up to 200 meters without hesitation, and employs a repertoire of vocalizations so sophisticated that researchers have identified more than 30 distinct variations with specific communicative functions. Unlike the wolf, it does not depend on large fixed territories. It adapts its behavior according to the season, forming tight family groups in winter and dispersing into pairs or solitary individuals during summer, when food availability is high enough to sustain individual strategies. It eats dead fish along the banks, wild fruit, amphibians, injured birds, and carrion. A diet so diverse, it makes it one of the most successful opportunistic predators the Northern Hemisphere has ever produced. And when dusk transforms the delta into silhouettes and reflections, the collective howl of the jackals rises from the reeds with an urgency that seems to come from another time, as if this animal knew, before all the others, that the night now arriving will not be like the last. There is a predator in this delta that does not run, does not swim, and does not fly, and yet it captures its prey with a speed the human eye can barely register. The dice snake, Natrix tessellata, is an aquatic serpent that evolved for a habitat so specific it has practically become a fish with scales. Its lungs are more efficient than those of any other Natrix species, allowing dives of more than 30 minutes in water below 10 degrees Celsius. It actively hunts in the shallow canals, pursuing the European perch, Perca fluviatilis, in short-distance accelerations that reach speeds remarkable for a cold-blooded reptile. The capture occurs with a lateral bite that immobilizes the fish by its flanks, and swallowing begins immediately, always head first. Beside it, its close relative, the grass snake, Natrix natrix, prefers the wet margins and seasonally flooded meadows, where amphibians are so abundant during spring that a single adult serpent can consume the equivalent of its own body weight in fewer than 15 days of intense feeding. Two predators, two parallel rivers of energy crossing the same water labyrinth, and neither of them makes the slightest sound to announce their arrival until it is already too late. Winter arrives in the delta not as a season, but as an invasion. When temperatures plunge below -10 degrees Celsius and the smaller canals begin to freeze from the banks inward toward the center, the great white pelican, Pelicanus onocrotalus, has already departed for weeks, but left behind in the compacted mud of the reed islands the most concrete proof that this place is one of the last great waterbird nurseries on Earth. During spring and summer, the delta hosts the largest nesting colony of this species outside Africa. More than 17,000 breeding pairs, a number that remained underestimated for decades until drones flew over the Roshka Buhayova Reserve in 2016 and revealed a reality 4 times greater than any conventional census had ever recorded. Each adult pair consumes more than 1 kilogram and 200 grams of fish per day during the chick rearing period, meaning the entire colony exerts a predation pressure on the delta's fish stocks that actively shapes the structure of fish communities. Not destroying, but regulating, just as the delta regulates everything here with a precision that seems intentional. The pouch-shaped bill, capable of expanding to hold more than 12 liters of water during a surface plunge, is one of the most efficient anatomical structures produced by evolution in any aquatic bird on the planet. And when thousands of these animals take flight simultaneously over the lagoon at dusk, the sound of their wings is deep enough to be felt in the chest before it is heard by the ears. In the clearings opened by the buffaloes along the higher banks of the delta, where the soil is firm enough to sustain deep roots, the red deer, Cervus elephas, has accomplished something extraordinary. It colonized an environment that no ungulate ecologist would expect it to tolerate. This is an animal of temperate forests and mountains, and yet, in this delta where the ground trembles underfoot and the trees grow with their feet in the water, it has built stable populations that have developed unique behaviors not recorded in any other European subpopulation of the species. Adult males, with antlers that can exceed 120 centimeters in span, have learned to swim crossings of up to 500 meters between islands during the rut. The bellow that echoes across the night canals in October sounds different here. Wetter, more reverberant, amplified by the water surface that surrounds it on all sides. Females with calves have been observed using floating islets as temporary nurseries, exploiting the natural isolation the water provides as a barrier against terrestrial predators. The red deer of the delta is not an animal that survived despite the environment. It is an animal that learned to use water as a tool, and that distinction changes everything we thought we knew about the limits of this species. The whooper swan, Cygnus cygnus, is not a symbol of elegance here. It is an endurance athlete with one of the most vertiginous migration stories of any bird in Europe. The individuals that arrive in the delta in autumn departed from regions as far north as western Siberia and Scandinavia, flying in V formations at altitudes that can exceed 8,000 meters, an altitude recorded by radar over Northern Ireland, equivalent to the summit of many of the world's greatest mountains, where oxygen barely sustains the life of any mammal. Unlike the mute swan, a sedentary and territorial species, the whooper swan vocalizes constantly in flight. Those powerful, trumpet-like calls that the ancient Greeks interpreted as the final song of a dying creature are, in reality, real-time communication signals between group members, keeping the formation cohesive even in conditions of crosswind and reduced visibility. In the delta, they feed on the submerged roots and rhizomes of aquatic macrophytes, plunging their long neck, which represents roughly 1/3 of the animal's total body length, reaching around 50 centimeters, to reach the bottom at depths of up to 1 meter and 20 centimeters. Each adult pair defends a feeding territory with an aggressiveness surprising for an animal that European iconography has always associated with serenity. And what happens when two adult males meet on the open waters of the delta is something that no children's book illustration could ever portray with honesty. below the surface, where light penetrates only a few meters before being absorbed by the plankton and tannins released by decomposing reeds, the European pike, Esox lucius, rules with a strategy that evolution has refined for more than 50 million years, and that is still studied in applied hydrodynamics programs. The perfect ambush. It can remain absolutely motionless for hours within submerged vegetation, its pectoral fins executing invisible micro-adjustments that maintain position without any perceptible displacement. A passive hydrodynamic stabilization that aerospace engineers have attempted to replicate in flight control systems. When prey enters the strike radius, which rarely exceeds 1.5 body lengths, the initial acceleration is among the fastest of any freshwater fish in the world. 0 to 40 kilometers per hour in less than 1/10 of a second, with the mouth expanding to create a suction that literally inhales the prey before any escape response is possible. The largest female individuals in the delta, males rarely exceed 60 centimeters, while females can surpass 1 meter and 30 centimeters, are apex predators of the larger canals, capable of capturing diving ducks, koi poo, and even juveniles of other large fish species. There is something deeply unsettling about observing a calm surface, and knowing that, directly below it, exists a killing machine that perfected its technique before any dinosaur had laid its first egg. The European badger, Meles meles, is perhaps the least likely animal to find thriving in a river delta, and it is precisely for this reason that its presence here reveals something fundamental about the nature of adaptability. The delta's badger colonies have built their sets on the highest ridges of the permanent islands, where the clay soil mixed with compacted sand allows the excavation of underground networks that can extend more than 30 meters horizontally and descend more than 3 meters below the surface. During seasonal floods, when the water rises and covers up to 90% of the delta's surface for weeks at a time, these animals remain in their elevated sets, venturing out only to swim to unflooded areas in search of earthworms, beetles, mushrooms, and fruit. An omnivorous diet that allows them to survive any temporary collapse of any of the available food categories. The family clan, which can include up to 15 individuals from 3 different generations sharing the same set system, maintains a level of social organization and dwelling hygiene that behavioral researchers describe as surprisingly elaborate for a mustelid. Sleeping chambers are regularly renewed with fresh vegetation, and latrines are kept strictly outside the main tunnels. Below this delta that seems made of nothing but water and light, there exists an underground city that no one sees, and one that was already here long before any human map ever dared to name this place. The raccoon dog, Nycterutus procyonoides, was not born on this land. It was brought from East Asia to Soviet fur farms in the 20th century and escaped into the marshes with a speed and determination that no breeder had foreseen. Today, it is one of the most successful invasive mammals in Europe, and the Danube Delta is one of its primary strongholds on the continent. The labyrinthine structure of the canals makes any population control effort enormously difficult, and the abundance of resources, fish, eggs, amphibians, fruit, carrion, means that an animal as omnivorous as this one will never need to travel great distances to feed. It is the only wild canid in the world that hibernates, or something very close to it. During the harshest winters, it enters a state of torpor that can last months, reducing its metabolism to a fraction of the normal rate and surviving on the fat reserves accumulated throughout autumn, an adaptation that no European wolf, fox, or jackal is capable of achieving. The ecological problem it represents is real and documented. Its attacks on waterbird nests during spring cause measurable impacts on populations of already endangered species, and its presence has silently altered the predation dynamics on islands where no nocturnal terrestrial predator had ever existed before its arrival. The delta accepted it, as it accepts everything. But the water does not forget what has been disturbed, and the balance that now takes shape is unlike anything that existed before. The European perch, Perca fluviatilis, is the most numerous fish in the delta's canals, and it is precisely that abundance that makes it the central cog of a food chain of staggering complexity. Striped in dark green and reddish orange, with a precision that appears painted, it lives in shoals that can include hundreds of individuals in the most productive lagoons, and those shoals are simultaneously hunters and hunted, preying on fry of various species while feeding pike, pelicans, herons, water snakes, otters, and human fishermen who arrive by boat before dawn. Juveniles spend their first months of life in shallow banks of emergent aquatic vegetation, where the light filtered through reed stems creates near-perfect camouflage for their coloration pattern. But as they grow, they migrate toward more open and deeper waters, where predation risk is higher and competition for food is more intense. Growth is directly proportional to water temperature and prey availability. In years of warm summers and abundant shoals of smaller fish, a perch can double its mass in a single season. This unglamorous animal, lacking the majesty of the sturgeon or the beauty of the swan, is what keeps everything functioning. The protein that carries solar energy captured by phytoplankton all the way to the wings of a pelican in flight above the Black Sea. There is a specific moment in this delta, a single instant that occurs only in the late afternoons of March, when the ice of the last frozen canals begins to crack and the cold, dark water flows beneath it once more, in which every process described until now overlaps simultaneously. The sturgeons ascend from the estuaries toward their spawning zones. The pelicans arrive in flocks of thousands from sub-Saharan Africa. The deer bellow on the flooded islands. The jackals mark new territories with howls that merge with the wind through the reeds, and the snakes emerge from their winter refuges and slide to the bank with months of accumulated hunger. The delta does not wake. The delta explodes. And in that explosion, which scientists call the spring flood pulse, and which local fishermen simply call when the river remembers it is alive, it becomes clear that what one observes here is not a fragile ecosystem that survived in spite of human pressure. It is a system of such profound robustness and complexity that it has withstood centuries of exploitation, war, industrialization, and climate change without losing its capacity to completely reinvent itself each spring. The Danube dies here, yes, but it dies the way only great rivers know how to die, exploding into life with a generosity that asks nothing in return, and that will not need us to continue long after we are gone.